June, an original post-apocalyptic story from the Spinosaurus, read by the author. This narration is one of many set within one shared universe of stories. It is recommended that you go to the playlist linked first in the description and listen to the one set before this one for some important context. Jack was running. He didn't know where he was, just that he was somewhere within view of a section of the Appalachian Mountain range. The forests here were dense and untamed, and those that lived on the mountains before the apocalypse could only do so because the forests didn't force them away. However, those that disappeared here did so because they disrespected it. Jack now dove and shoved his way through one of those forests, having left his camp well behind after being chased away from it by the thing that was causing him to run for his life. He wasn't running from a bear, or a deranged hermit, or some feral human living in the mountains. He was running from a dinosaur, one that had decided it wanted to make him its afternoon meal. At one time in his life, that would have been an impossible scenario to experience, but it was reality for all those still alive. He hadn't gotten a good look at it in his hurry to escape from it, but he thought that it looked like a Dilophosaurus from the size and the crests on its head. While that, ironically, might have been his favorite species as a kid, he was not interested in becoming a meal for one. He had bigger aspirations for life than just becoming another unremembered meal for some hungry dinosaur, or any carnivore in general. He knew that his only hope was to outrun it, because since it had been over 10 years since the world ended, he knew he wouldn't, or would be extremely unlikely to at any rate, find a car that worked he could escape in. What he needed to find was a place to hide, an abandoned cabin. There were hundreds dotted around the mountains, or a small cave that he could squeeze into where the dinosaur could not follow. Anywhere that could keep him from being the next person to go missing in the mountains. Jack dodged between several tree trunks until he did the worst thing he could have in that moment. He tripped on a root. With a yelp, he tumbled into the root's tree. The trunk felt oddly soft, he noticed, and then onto the ground next to it. Groaning, he rolled onto his back and saw what he'd run into. It took a moment to register that what he thought was a root was actually the end of a clawed toe. One of 3 clawed toes that were attached to a large foot. A slow glance to his left showed that he was lying next to a large ankle, and glancing up further, still partially refusing to accept what his eyes were telling him, he saw what he had fallen against, what he'd thought was just another tree trunk, was actually a leg, virtually the same color as an actual tree trunk, which was attached to an unusually large Tyrannosaurus rex. It was looking down at him, eyes piercing his own, large upper teeth partially exposed and glinting. Its head cocked to the side slightly, and it was growling softly. The Tyrannosaurus then let out a deep, low, vibrating vocalization as it looked down at him, making an ominously inquisitive sound without even opening its jaws. Somehow, perhaps because Jack felt the vibrations as the sound passed through him, it was more terrifying than a loud roar would have been. Jack just stared up at it, frozen from surprise. How did I not see that? He pondered, in a brief moment of calm, before the weight of the true horror at what the sight meant set in. He didn't know how he'd had such tunnel vision that he saw what should have obviously been there, and obviously another threat, as just another tree. Now he was going to be eaten by this dinosaur instead of the other one that had been chasing him. Not even bothering to get up, he laid his head back in the dirt in resignation to his fate and waited to be scooped up and pierced by the mighty, jagged teeth in the Tyrannosaur's jaws. Well, my. What are you doing? The words triggered some reaction in his brain, and it finally fired off a command of movement. Jack shot up from his lying position and scooted back from the massive dinosaur. He'd heard from other survivors over the years that some of them could talk, but he'd never actually seen one. All he was able to sputter out was a, "What the f-?" The Tyrannosaur snorted, tracing her large teeth with her tongue. She was a mix of various shades of brown, hence why she blended in with the forest so well. Her scaly, featherless skin appeared rough and tough-looking, and it was warty in places. Her eyes were green, with black pupils narrowed in focus. A dark ring of colored scales surrounded her eyes as well, making the green appear even brighter and more vivid. Her upper back, upper tail, and top of her head were a dark brown color, as was her legs. Her belly, underjaw, and the bottom of her tail were a more light tan, and in between the two colors there was an area that was more of a mix between the two, and it was like a barrier between them. She also had stripes of an even darker shade of brown covering her snout, down her neck, and down her back to the end of her tail. She stood tall, maybe close to 10 feet taller or a little less than a non-speaking Rex would stand. She also stood more upright and straighter than the forward-leaning non-talking ones would. Yet, of all her appearance, what Jack took notice of most was her sheer size. A normal Tyrannosaurus would at least have to bite a human in half in order to eat it. This one looked big enough to just swallow one whole. Before either Jack or the Rex could say anything else, there was a shriek from the Dilophosaurus chasing him as it scampered to a stop a few paces from the Rex. The Tyrannosaur looked at it, and then back at Jack. "Oh, running from something trying to eat you, are you?" "I can help with that." Her voice was not very deep, and surprisingly rather gentle sounding, but as she spoke, and looked down at Jack and stopped licking her lips, her aura suddenly turned more sinister. To Jack it became clear what she meant by help. He wasn't going to be the one helped. He sputtered and tried to scramble to his feet, but the Rex was faster. She knocked him back down with her nose, and then grabbed him by his legs in her jaws. Not hard enough to break the skin, but just enough to hold him firmly. She then lifted her head away from the ground, carrying Jack upwards away from the angry Dilophosaurus, and then tossed him skyward, opening her jaws wide below him. The last thing Jack saw as he tumbled down was the open abyss of teeth racing up to meet him. The long tongue and gaping throat, and the vivid green eyes wide open and alight with excitement. He landed inside the jaws, struck the fleshy interior with force, and they slammed shut around him, and everything in his world turned black. When Jack eventually came to and opened his eyes, it took a moment to process what had happened. When it did all come back to him, he jerked, practically spasmed, into an upright position right away, panting hard from panic, expecting to see a hungry Tyrannosaur standing nearby, ready to eat him for real this time. Though he didn't see her immediately, he still felt that this was it. Despite everything he'd done to get this far, he was just going to end up being another person who simply couldn't make it. He'd been lying on his back on the forest floor, staring up at the trees, sticky from the dried dinosaur saliva, and everywhere was sore from the impact of his landing. He felt a strong dizziness from the sudden movement and groaned, trying to clear his pounding head. "Welcome back to the world of the living," a familiar voice said, breaking through the fog in his head. Jack stumbled up and onto his feet, then spun around and saw the Rex lying on her stomach right behind where he'd been lying, looking rather amused and even concerned. Her eyes and pupils were now much more relaxed than they'd been when Jack had literally run into her, and when he'd been falling into her mouth after being tossed in the air like a toy. He didn't buy the look of concern, though. Even though she was a dinosaur, it was still plain on her face to see, and while still a little unsteady, he was ready to run. "Really now, little human? After I saved you from that predator that wanted to eat you? the Rex said. Jack shook his head, trying to shake off the dizziness still clinging to him like a parasite. You ate me, he said. You ate me, and this must be my personal hell. The Rex snorted, the end points of her mouth possibly, impossibly, twitching into an ever slight grin. You're adorable. No, what I did was caught you, and made the one chasing you think I ate you. Very different than actually doing it. If I'd swallowed you, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I just held you inside my jaws like one of your kind would hold a piece of candy. Once the one after you realized its meal was gone, it didn't stick around, and I spat you right back out. Jack's dizzy mind turned the words over and over as it processed them, and it concluded that the Rex was right. He didn't want to admit it, but she had to have been right about what happened. Though, maybe it was just the heat getting to his already light head. If she was lying, then why would she spit him back out, though? It didn't make sense that she would, unless she really did want to help him. But why would she? What was her motivation to care about what happened to some random person who literally ran into her? The scenario just hurt his confused brain even more, and it didn't help the dizziness go away any faster. Not even a thank you? The Rex asked. So, what are you going to do now? Jack replied, finally able to form words and ignoring the Rex's question. He was more worried in what her next action would be rather than responding to her statement. If she was waiting to eat him for real, he knew he wouldn't be able to get away, even if he was on steady feet. So if that was her plan, he just wanted to know so he could accept it like he had before she'd saved him. The Rex cocked her head again. I have no intention of hurting you, she said, though you certainly seem to have convinced yourself otherwise. As she spoke, Jack's head finally cleared and he took a few deep breaths, pushing himself off of the tree and back a few steps. Now with his mind more cleared up, he regarded the conversation over again. So, why save me if you're not just going to eat me? Isn't that what you guys do? What's in it for you otherwise if I'm not meat on the table? Jack asked, still backing away with slow, slightly unsteady steps, not taking his eyes off the oversized dinosaur long enough to even blink. What? Just because I'm a giant carnivore, it means I can't suppress those instincts to do the right thing? Isn't that what you humans used to do? Aside from the giant part, put all the bad things aside and work together? Ones like me are not like the ones that can't talk. We've got a bit more going on in our head, like being able to make a choice to help someone in need. Sure, some of us that can talk are as evil as some bad people, but there are some, like me, that are kind, like many of you can be, the Rex said. Jack paused. You really aren't? The Rex nodded. Jack sighed, allowing himself to relax just ever so slightly. Okay, well, thank you then. You're welcome. We're not all bad, the Rex said. Now, if you would be so kind as to actually let me eat you as a way of saying thanks, that'd be great. What? Jack sputtered, stumbling back and falling on his butt again. The Rex just smiled that dinosaur smile, showing her large, pointed teeth off, and let out a bellowing chuckle. Just kidding. I just wanted to see how you'd react. After the candy comparison, I just had to, she said, chomping her jaws together and getting to her feet. So do you have somewhere to go? Anywhere that's not your stomach or your mouth. Comments like that will be the death of me, Jack muttered to himself before he said out loud, I have a camp a few miles towards the mountains from the place you found me. If you'd like me to go back there with you, just to make sure you make it. Okay, I can do that, the Rex said, nudging Jack back onto his feet with her nose. You came from that way. Jack nodded, realizing that she'd follow him even if he said otherwise, and started walking in the indicating direction. Uneasy, but still grateful for the offered protection. Though it was also still unnerving being constantly followed by a massive, oversized Tyrannosaurus Rex as well, especially when it didn't take its eyes off you once, as you literally walked in its engulfing shadow. Jack's camp was untouched when he and the Rex arrived, and he quickly went to his tent, grabbing his water flask and taking a long drink. The summer heat had nearly run him dry. As he was doing this, the Rex looked around. "You're all alone?" she asked. "It's rare to still see people out here who aren't part of a group." The camp was in an open space, wide, but bordered by dense trees, and was virtually at the base of one of the mountains. She deduced he was alone because not only was there not a place anyone could be hiding, it was also only set up for the use of one person. Jack nodded, lowering the flask away from his mouth to speak. "I have been since my twin brother snapped and decided to kill everyone in our group before taking off in the only working car we had for California." "What's in California?" the Rex asked, speaking the foreign word slowly to make sure she pronounced it correctly. She couldn't fathom why something in some faraway location would prompt someone to try and kill their own brother for a working vehicle. "His ex-high school sweetheart," Jack replied. "That's what's out there." Or so he thought. She actually moved to Baja California, not the state. So, the world stuck that bird up his ass there. No last laugh for him. If he even made it that far. That was 6 years ago, Jack said, shaking his head a little. He then looked up at the Tyrannosaur. "So, do you have a name? I feel like I need to call you something if you're going to keep hanging around," he asked, taking notice of the fact that the T-Rex seemed in no hurry to leave, even though they were at the camp. "Is that an invitation to stay with you?" the Rex asked. "I know I did sort of invite myself back here before, but I wouldn't mind hanging around. You're kind of funny, cutie." "As long as you don't eat me for real, yes?" Jack replied, sounding like he was questioning his own words even as he said them. He also chose to ignore her last comment entirely, instead of being flustered by it. "I mean, you don't seem to be in a hurry to leave, so I couldn't even make you, so yeah, you can hang out as long as you want to, I suppose." He wasn't sure why he offered to agree to such an arrangement, but the words have sort of spilled out. Part of him deep down must have been more tired of being alone and constantly vulnerable than he realized, if he was willing to quickly accept such company after knowing them for such a short amount of time. The Tyrannosaurus reared back a bit, lightly snapping her jaws like she had earlier, following it up with a teasing smirk. "Oh, so I can continue tossing you up so you fall into my jaws, then sucking on you again like hard candy?" the Rex asked with what sounded like a human laugh. Jack just stared up at her, eyes wide and expression exasperated. "Oh, okay, I won't do that either," the Rex said. "Unless I feel like you owe me for something," she quickly added, getting yet another exasperated look from Jack. Again, he realized that he really must have missed company if he was willing to accept that so quickly. "Damned if I do, damned if I don't. At least this one won't actually eat me, like the next will," he thought. But if teasing was the price that came with a companion, then he could accept that part of her. "Hey, I'm an actual giant carnivore, not just one in ego like a lot of people tend to be. And you are a perfectly bite-sized cutie, so don't give me such a shocked look like you can't believe I'd at least suggest it. Do you have a name or not? Jack asked the Rex, wanting to change the topic away from the fact that she thought he was perfectly bite-sized and back to his original question that she'd ignored, trying to get the horrible mental vision of being stuck inside her mouth again and sucked on like candy out of his head. No, I never needed one. When I hatched, I was alone and had to raise myself, she replied, finally letting the topic drift away from causing Jack more chagrin. And I guess I never had a reason to give myself one since there was never anyone around to call me by it. Sorry, Jack replied, noticing the shift in her voice and deciding to just not think about her teases or the possible promises she might carry out later. Her teasing demeanor had gone away in that moment, and her tone was serious. It sounded lonely, like she was as tired of being alone as he was. Maybe the very reason she had just not let him go off on his own after saving his life. Maybe, deep down, deep enough that they didn't realize it, they just wanted a companion. Maybe it was why Jack did put up more of a fight when she'd followed him. Don't be. Many of us had to, she replied, with the same tone of voice that carried a sense of longing with it. Hatched alone. So you were one of the first ones that reappeared at the start of all this. Huh, neat. You don't, like, by any chance remember if you existed about 68, 69 million years ago, do you? Jack asked. One of his old theories had been that the anomaly had taken animals that lived and died in the past and given them new lives in the present. No, the Tyrannosaurus replied, shaking her large head. Jack nodded. Fair enough. Is just that we never found out where the dinosaurs or any of the prehistoric creatures came from, so thought I'd ask if it was possible that you were reborn after living a past life, however millions of years ago, he said. Well, even if I did live way back during the original time of the dinosaurs, I doubt I would have had a name then either, the Rex said, with a slight chuckle this time. Again, fair enough. Jack chuckled as well. Well, you should name yourself now, he said. Be like a kind of statement that you're not just another hungry T-Rex, like all those old movies used to show, but rather your own person. Or dinosaur. Oh, I don't know. You give me one, the Rex replied. Jack paused for a moment. He muttered, leaning into his tent to look for inspiration, not having expected to be entrusted with this out of the blue. He didn't find anything for several moments, until he realized what month it was. Well, what do you think of June? June. What made you think of that? She asked. I don't know, it just seems to fit your personality, Jack said, looking up at his unexpected but now welcome new friend. He now had to admit that in truth the idea of company, even from a giant dinosaur that could eat him in one bite, was nice since said dinosaur really wanted to be friends. June, she said. I like it. And I'm happy you opened yourself up to being friends with a oh-so-scary big meat-eater like me, she added, tone both playful and grateful, as she lowered her head down to be at eye level with Jack, sniffing her new friend, and after looking at him for several seconds, giving him a giant affectionate lick on the side, which Jack did not seem to be too approving of. I think you and I will get along very well, my little human piece of candy. Jack shook his head. Oh, back to it already, he muttered. June, I trust you, but please don't do that to me. Or call me that. Ever. Just one time? June asked, giving him the Tyrannosaur version of puppy dog eyes, an odd sight on such a massive creature that no one should be able to see close up and live to tell the tale. An animal that also should not have had intelligence equal to a human, or intelligence enough to pull that look off, mixed with the blunt dinosaur instincts programmed into it. But this one did. Jack just sighed, feeling a little nauseous, and shook his head. A tiny voice was reminding him that she most certainly could do that if she really wanted to. June was certainly a personality and a presence he would have to get used to. Hopefully she was all jokes and no bite. I'll just take that as a we'll talk about it later, June said with a snort, licking her jawline as she said it. Jack just looked up at the Tyrannosaur with the same look of exasperation. Yep. She was most certainly a personality he would have to get used to, and he was okay with that. In time, he supposed he'd grow to love her sense of humor. Hopefully that was all the candy comments were. Hopefully. Probably not. Before that, though, I realized that I don't know your name yet, June said. Jack hadn't even realized that it hadn't been shared. You've got to give me something so I don't just have to call you cutie or bite-sized all the time, she added. Jack sighed. It never stops. Jack, I'm Jack, he said. June smiled down at him, stepping back so that he was no longer in her shadow. It's very nice to meet you, Jack, she said. And that's how we met, June said, finishing up the story many years later. She was lying on her stomach facing a campfire that had been built just off the side of a highway on one of Montana's seemingly endless prairies. She nudged Jack with the side of her jaw and continued, This tasty little treat and I have been together ever since. Yeah, she's all right, a much older Jack chuckled, having long gotten used to her sense of humor. Sitting around the campfire with them, the only light visible for countless miles across the prairie, was a mixed-matched group of survivors. The campfire was crackling softly, smoke rising into the starry night sky, the flames being fueled by the wood of a few dry trees that were scattered across the prairie, and from the dry bundles of tumbleweeds that were built up along the old highway. Jack had the look of a man who had stepped out of the Old West, wearing a full cowboy getup, hat, gun holster, boots and all. They had been telling their story to two strangers who had turned up on one of the deserted highways and joined them. The strangers were claiming that they were from a network of connected communities established in Indiana. The others seated around the fire were people Jack and June were familiar with, having known and survived with them for years. Jim, the group's unofficial leader, his brother George, both were from California before the world ended, a feathered Utah raptor who was a tan color with splashes of red on his back and head, that could speak, and who was from the same place as the brothers, who had met them the spring after everything fell apart, named Flash lie between them. Flash was a level-headed dinosaur, smart and resourceful, and yet he was also caring and loyal as the day is long, especially to Jim, who had met him first, and saved him from a steel trap, though he was also rather quiet and not necessarily always one to start a conversation. When standing, Flash stood around just 2 feet taller than a non-talking Utah raptor would have. June, an original post-apocalyptic story. Alright, Wave 3 of narrations has officially kicked off. And I thought doing a standalone, shorter story would be the best way to kick it off. The next ones all coming up are going to be connected to ones that came in Waves 1 and 2. The next one coming out, hopefully the day after this one, is called Followed, and it will be a follow-up to the A Survivor's Daily Routine trilogy. Then I have an ominous element, which will be a follow-up to The Bridge and Whispers and Storms. And then I'm also going to be doing part 2 of The Hybrid at the end of Wave 3. And then, I say the end of Wave 3, but there might be 2 more that come afterwards. But those probably will be pushed back for Wave 4, which will be sometime probably in mid-2023. So yeah, those are going to be at least 4 coming in Wave 3. And like I said, I just thought doing a nice standalone one to introduce you to a character you haven't met yet would be a good way to kick off Wave 3. And also, doing a little bit more of a lighthearted story, it gave me a chance to explore the kind of unfiltered, blunt personality and sense of humor that I think that these kinds of creatures would have if they could talk. So, June and Spino both very much have a sense of humor like that. You've probably noticed, and I just think that's the kind of that kind of thing would very much be a thing. So, but anyway, I do hope you enjoyed. It was a lighthearted story, and not even a very long story. I think it was. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just gonna be honest. I didn't have any pre-prepared thoughts. I just wanted to wrap this up. So, anyway, that's what's coming in Wave 3, and this was just a nice intro to Wave 3, a little standalone story that's a little bit more lighthearted because the stuff coming in the rest of this wave are not going to be as lighthearted. So, thank you for listening. Please stick around for the rest of Wave 3, and please also be sure to go give the entire series a listen. I have done many of these, and I put a lot of work into all of them, and I just hope you enjoy. And I put a lot of work into these, and I cannot wait to share the rest of Wave 3 with you all. So yeah, Followed is next, and I will be recording it tomorrow, the day that you're seeing this. So yes, one more time, thank you for watching. Please give the whole series a listen, and I will see you in the next episode.